So our panel today is really to talk about the rules and regulations for this emerging industry. I'm happy to moderate. You got a fabulous panel here. I'm going to do a quick introduction of their backgrounds real quickly so you know who they are. But if you're thinking about getting into this business, you need to understand what the rules are, what the law and the rules are, what the issues are for compliance, risk management, as well as additional ideas on how to finance your business as well. So we've got a really great panel here today. Let me just start here on my right, starting here, Stephen Hall. Stephen Hall is the General Counsel of the Florida Department of Agriculture. He and his team have spent a lot of time on the rule development that's required from the passage of the bill in 2019. He grew up in Malone, Florida, attended the University of Florida, bachelor's degree in food and resource economics with a minor in agricultural law, master's degree at Stanford University in Birmingham, won't hold that against him, in environmental management, and a Juris Doctorate from the Cumberland School of Law. Steve's a very talented guy. He's had several positions at the Department of Agriculture and now is the point person in the General Counsel's office for making sure these rules move forward. He's going to talk about these rules and regulations and the rule in particular so you understand what's required to get a permit, how to be compliant, et cetera. Next to him is really a fascinating, very helpful guy, Dr. Eric Rohrig. He's the Bureau Chief, Methods Development and Biological Control at Florida Department of Agriculture. He is 15 years of experience in investigating and implementing techniques and methods for detection and control and eradication of invasive plants. Eric has been the guy managing the permits for the Industrial Hemp Research Project. So both the University of Florida, Florida A&M, as Representative Alexander talked about, he's been the point person. And this is all new. I mean, this is a new area. They wanted to make sure they were doing this right. So Eric has done a yeoman's job on that. Next to him, we have Glenn Burns, shareholder at Stearns Weaver. He has represented a variety of clients in the cannabis space. As you know, we've got a medical marijuana program as well, regulated by the Department of Health. This is under the Department of Ag, so they're separate. And it's very clear we want to make sure these stay separate for a variety of purposes. Glenn's got a lot of experience in cannabis-related businesses and is going to talk today about compliance issues in hemp and potentially some of the issues to ensure that it's separate from medical marijuana. Robert Williams, Lewis Longman and Walker is next to him. Extensive experience in environmental land use and agriculture, both in the public and the private sector. He focuses on land use law. Spent 11 years in the land use practice in Tampa Bay, moved to Tallahassee. He was actually in the General Counsel's office of the Department of Ag, so he's very familiar with what they're going through right now. And was at the DEP, and now he's in private practice with Lewis Longman and Walker, one of our very strong land use attorney firms in Florida. And then at the end, we've forced Mike Akers, recruited him to come and talk about banking this industry. For all those of you who are getting into this, and for those of you who have been in the medical marijuana space, banking cannabis and banking hemp have been challenges. And so as this hemp has been descheduled and and made legal, so to speak, taken off the Schedule I drug list, banks in Florida, credit unions in Florida are exploring helping farmers, growers, business people find financial solutions to those services they want to provide. So. Mike, thank you for coming. He is with Florida Flag Credit Union, with the Department of Agriculture's, premier credit union, so to speak. So he's vested in this in a variety of ways. So let me start it out, Stephen, and then we'll go through this. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes. We'll open it up for questions at the end and try to be as interactive as possible. So, Mr. Paul, either whatever you want to do. Yeah, come on.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Hall. I'm the General Counsel at the Florida Department of Agriculture. I grew up in the 850. Actually, I grew up in the 850 when part of it used to be called the 904. I don't know if any of you remember that. I grew up over a little town called Malone over in Jackson County. I know we're going to have a version of this in Jackson County here in a few weeks. And I have spent my entire career, legal career at the Department of Agriculture. And so when I was put in charge of leading this charge, one of the things I told the commissioner is we're going to write these rules in such a way that our farmers have the opportunity to take advantage of this, especially after living through Hurricane Michael last year. We still have a family farm over in Jackson County, and we were impacted as well. So I hope that those of you in the room, I see a lot of farmers in the room, I hope a lot of you that we can have time to answer questions today. I want to talk about a little bit how we got here, and then I'm also going to try to explain the rulemaking process itself, so that to give you an understanding about the timeline we're on. There's been a lot of confusion or a lot of questions out there, and I will tell you, just to manage some expectations first, we're almost to the halfway point of the department's rule writing process, okay? So I'll get us there, and I'll tell you the timeline and the things that you can think of so you can prepare to decide about where you want to go with your operation. So how did we get here? Back in 2014, the U.S. Farm Bill was passed, and in that Farm Bill, it allowed Congress allowed states to start research programs. In 2017, Florida adopted a research statute, and our department was given the responsibility to write the rules for how, at that time, University of Florida, IFAS, and FAMU could conduct industrial hemp research projects. We could quickly get to work, and in early 2018, our rules were finalized and in place, and we worked with FAMU and UF the entire time through to get there. So then, just as soon as we had gotten our rules in place, based on the timeline, we started getting in and started working with UF and FAMU to get their projects started up and what those projects would look like. Then the 2018 Farm Bill came along last December. I will never forget, I was sitting in my office, it was the week before Christmas, I had the news on and I heard the blip that President Trump had signed the 2018 Farm Bill, and I said, we will, as we normally do, we'd start digging through that and realized there was a huge hemp component, and that was the first day it struck me, wow, we're probably going to have a big role to play in this. So me and my team got to work right away researching hemp, what other states had done, because it was very clear to us that this was a commercial grow versus our industrial rules, the industrial research projects that we have going on. So what did that look like? How do we do? And so we started working right then with finding ways and what could we do within our department? What would that look like if the legislature gave us that authority? And we started thinking about what information we would need, what authority we would need as the department to try to stand up a program in a manner that would be helpful to our farmers. So what we did is we worked with the legislature, and they gave us authority passed this past year, known as Senate Bill 1020, and we immediately got to work with rulemaking and putting the muscles around this. The statute you can think of kind of like the bone structure, the meat of around the bones are the rules. And so that's what we're doing right now with the rules. We actually started our rulemaking process back in June. We put together some draft rules and sent them around, put them on our website, and then held a series of workshops around the state, and have since then taken in all the comments we received at those workshops and really been trying to be thoughtful about what we could do and what the farmers said would work and what they said would not work. So we've taken all that in and taken consideration. And so until we get today, about a week ago, we released a new set of draft rules that we are considering taking comments on right now. We didn't do a series of workshops there, but we have a couple of advisory committees that we presented this information to ask. This is a bunch of advisory committees appointed by the commissioner and by the legislature to advise the department on the creation of these rules. And so we're now taking that feedback in from everybody. And like I said before, we're about in our midway point. And we are soon, in the next couple of weeks, going to be put out what is called our Notice of Proposed Rule. And that is where the department says, these are the rules we intend to adopt. So I'm going to get in just a second about what those rules look like to give you kind of an overview, but I want to tell you about this stage of rulemaking and why that's important. It's a stage where we say these are the rules we intend to adopt. We will do a series of hearings around the state where we will hear from producers and other interested parties as to what they think about our rules. Did we hit the mark? Did we miss the mark? And then we will take that information back, and it is also an opportunity for us to listen and take those comments into consideration and decide if we need to make any changes before we finalize and adopt the rule. It is also the stage where any potentially interested party could file a rule challenge against the department, and if that happens, that probably slows the rulemaking challenge down, the rulemaking process down by 6 months to a year. So we're hopeful, and we're working very hard to work with our interested parties that they would not challenge us on the rules we're doing. We hope that they will listen to us, and we'll see that we're trying to listen, we're trying to improve the rules as much as possible. We have some authority issues, we have some limitations about what we can and cannot do provided to us in the statute. So we're out there working daily, and I mean daily, every day, several hours a day, me and my team are working on this issue to make sure we get this right, as close to right as we can on the first time. So with that, after we file the rules, the Farm Bill requires the states adopting commercial plans to submit those rules to the USDA. Farm Bill then gives USDA 60 days to review those rules, and then the department, after that approval is received, then the department will be off onto the races with issuing our cultivation permits. I want to talk, we have a lot of confusion. I'm going to get a lot of questions about that at the end, about what that timing looks like. I will just tell you up front what we know. USDA has said they're not going to approve any state plans until they get their rules issued. What the Farm Bill said was USDA had to write their own set of rules. That's for places in the U.S. where those states did not come up with their own commercial hemp programs. So what USDA has said is they are going to write their rules. They expect them to be out this fall, and then once those rules are written and they have put those in place, then they will start reviewing state plans. So what we have tried to do with, and I think where we've been put with the need in the legislation and the authority to write our rules, and then our natural rule process we have to go through here in the state of Florida, is I think we'll be coming in for a landing about the same time, hopefully, that USDA is ready to review state plans. So if everything goes well, we will marry up with USDA and on their timing, and everything will be smooth sailing on the end. But it's one of those things that it is an evolving situation, and we are constantly talking to USDA about where they're at, where they're doing, and are they ready for us when we're ready to submit. So there is a little bit of uncertainty there, but that's something we're working daily with the USDA. So now that I've bored you with all this legal mumbo jumbo and lawyer speak, what you want to hear about is actually our draft rules. So if you want to, you can go out on our website, which is www.fdacs.gov, FDACS, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, fdacs.gov, and you can very easily find cannabis. We have a whole cannabis page that talks about not only industrial hemp, commercial hemp, but also we have some consumer services, consumer protection issues related to medical marijuana. We have all sorts of information there that you're welcome to visit and look at. But on that page, you will find September 18th draft rules. In those draft rules are the latest we've put out for public consumption. We have, even though they've only been out about 2 weeks now, we are continually tinkering with them, making changes. The closest thing to a final version you will see will be what that gets published in that notice proposed rule, and I expect that to come out the next couple of weeks. So what do the draft rules say? They are, whatever we finally adopt are essentially going to have a couple different stages to them. They're going to have a cultivation piece, which I think a lot of you are interested in. They're going to have some language about seeds, certified seed, and how that works. And then they're also going to have information about manufacturing foods for ingestion by pets and animals, and ingestion by humans. So let's start at the beginning on the cultivation piece. Our cultivation rule is going to have a series of definitions which are important, including control person. I'll explain why a control person is important in a minute. But the meat of it starts with an application and what has to be submitted. The department is required by the statute to collect certain information. That's going to include an actual application, which is going to have information, just your who, what, when, where, why type information that you would normally get for a license from a state agency. And then it's going to require that the plot location for the grow be indicated. The Farm Bill and the statute require the department to collect the GPS coordinates and a legal land description for that. So you're going to have to tell the department exactly where you intend to grow your commercial hemp. Also, it requires each control person is the definition we're going with to get a full set, to submit a full set of fingerprints. What that looks like is the Farm Bill requires that if an individual has had a felony conviction for a controlled substance violation in whatever state where they were, they are prohibited for 10 years from that conviction from getting a license issued by the state for growing hemp. So that's what the fingerprints required, and we think we've came up with a very simple way of doing that. You can go to any there are several hundred, I'll put it that way, things like UPS stores and other places where you can go in and have your fingerprint scanned, and we'll give you the number that you do that when you submit it at that location, and FDLE will run your fingerprints and they will be submitted to the department. Also, the applicant will have to submit an environmental containment plan. Dr. Rohr will talk more about that, but that is frankly, we don't know what this plant's going to do in the state. This is one of those areas that we hope we're being protective of, not only this industry to make sure it doesn't become an invasive and spread outside of your growing plot, but also we have as a role as a department to be protective of other crops and commodities in the state and make sure that this doesn't spread. So this is my goal, is hopefully in a few years when we get some more research and we have more experience with this plot, this would be an area of the rule the department can walk back a little bit when we get a little bit more experience down the road. Also, the statute requires each applicant to submit a waste disposal plan. We've had a lot of comments about this. I'll tell you, what is in the rule today is not what we're going to adopt. We've actually been working hard on coming up with a waste disposal plan that sets some minimums. We initially had said, you tell us what your waste disposal plan is going to be. We heard from the interested parties that they wanted to know more information about what we wanted. So we've been working with our scientists, been working hard to come up with an idea as what's the minimum requirements that we're going to require from your waste disposal plan, to give everybody a little bit more advice on what that has to look like. Some other highlights from our cultivation rule is a rule provides that hemp may only be grown on land, bona fide agricultural land. That's your tax collector. He identifies land as agricultural and non-agricultural. So limited to agricultural land, and then land that is zoned agricultural or industrial use is a change from our first draft to our rules. We heard during our first series of workshops that people may be interested in growing this in old warehouse spaces. So we've amended the rule to allow the growth in those industrial zoned areas as well. One of the other issues that producers may be interested in is we're at every access point to the plot of land where hemp is going to be grown. A sign has to be placed providing the license number of the grower and the address of that cultivation area, along with a statement that this is hemp being cultivated under a license from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. This was requested to us by our law enforcement partners, who asked that it be very clearly identified what is hemp and what is not. So if they driving by and see a field of cannabis growing, they're going to be looking for a sign of hemp showing that it is actually hemp grown under a license from the department. Some of the other features of the rule is we're going to have, because the statute in the Farm Bill requires that the hemp only be harvested after it's been confirmed that it meets the legal level. So there is a legal level for hemp. Hemp is something that is only equal to or less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. And our rule goes into some detail about how that's going to be determined. But here, let me just simplify it down for you. Before a grower can harvest, they have to sample. We're going to have a sampling manual, and I think Dr. Rohr's going to talk a little bit more about the science behind that and what that looks like. We're going to have a sampling manual that provides each grower the opportunity about how sampling should be conducted. So the grower will go to their field, take a sample. They will then ship it to an independent third-party lab, which they will contract with or hire to do their sampling for them. The lab will test. The lab will then send the results of that test to the grower and to the department simultaneously. If it is below that legal limit, if it meets that legal limit test, then the producer will get the green light from the department to harvest. And if it is not, the department will come out and do a confirmatory sample, which we will test and run the test on in our own laboratories. We felt that this was the fastest way to get the grower through the process instead of trying to run all these tests all at the same time through our laboratory, let the growers choose what laboratory they would like to work with. We will have a list of laboratories on our website that have reached out to us and told us they're interested in running these tests on behalf of growers. And so we're trying to put as much of that information there on our website. So I will continue hitting that, keep going there for more updates. Like I said, if there is a issue where it is above that 3%, we are working on and hoping that coming out of the research projects that UF IFAS are doing will get some ways to remediate that crop. We're listening to ideas on how that can work, and our goal is to work with every producer to find a way so that they can remediate their crops, because the last thing we as a department want to do is have to go to some farmer and say, your crop is over the legal limit, it has to be destroyed. So we are working hard, and we have a promise to you as the agency for the Department of Agriculture that we're going to be working with our producers to try to avoid that if at all possible. Last thing I want to point out is we do have some intrastate and interstate requirements. Well, let me back up a step. We heard during our first round of workshops that we had hurricane events, as we all know here in Florida. What happens if we have to harvest our crop before we get our test results back? So we put a process in this draft of the rule to allow producers to harvest and hold while their test results come back, hopefully be able to harvest it, put it in storage, so that under lock and key, so that after the storm passes or whatever emergency event it can be, then we'll be able to have our test results back and be able to continue with them for the processing. We have some, like I said, we have some intrastate and interstate processing requirements. We get a lot of questions about this. We have issues in Florida with plant pest and disease. I think Dr. Rohr talked about it a little bit more, but our experience and what led us to this is our experience with the plants imported by the universities for this process. Every plant that has been brought in, or every shipment of plants, has some sort of pest and disease on it. So we have to get, and again, be protective of not only that are not endemic to Florida. So we have to be protective of our other industries in the state. So what we're asking in our interstate, which is what we require for all other plants moved into the state, is that a phytosanitary certificate be conducted or be examined. The phytosanitary certificate can travel with the plant material coming into the state. So just to make sure we don't have any bugs or diseases coming through with it. One thing I want to point out in the rest of the rules is that for hemp seed, the statute says that that growers may only use certified hemp seed or cultivars for planting in Florida. So what this has done is it has been very protective of our growers to say that you can only use certified seed that we know what it is. I will tell you there's been a little confusion about what certified seed means. Certified seed means, in accordance with the statute that was referenced in the legislation, that a member of a certifying agency has looked at the seed and says, yes, that is hemp seed. The problem with that is there is a dearth of hemp seed available out there on the markets right now. So what we have done as a department is we have talked to every certifying agency around. We've talked to who of you in the world that we can get a hold of. We've talked to them and said, who have you sent certified hemp seed for? What seed company have you certified hemp seed for? And we've called them and said, hey, do you have any hemp seed? What can you do? So we are actively updating that list and are about ready to put that onto our website as well. So our producers, we will do some of the homework for the producers for seed. The other part of that statute says certified seed or cultivars. I will tell you there is no certifying agency in the world that we can find that is currently certifying cultivars. Cultivars can mean clones, it can mean cuttings, things like that. So what we have done is we have put it into our rule to allow certified cultivars to be used by our producers, hoping that these certifying agencies will see this as a market opportunity and will move into that space. Because our scientists really believe, and the department believes, that these clones, these cultivars will be a way that a lot of our crops are grown. It gets you a little bit, they're grown from seedlings in a nursery and then transplanted into a row crop. So we're hoping to see that grow into that, but that's one of the ways the department's facing forward, trying to find a way to give our growers every opportunity. The rest of our rules for our seeds and our pet foods and our human foods essentially fold this process into our existing regulatory programs. On pet food, we are limiting it right now to dogs, cats, and specialty pets. So that's like your gerbils and things like that, lizards, all those sort of things. All right. I grew up on a farm in Jackson County, like I said before. I never thought I'd be able to talk about what CBD oil somebody could feed to their gerbils. I had never expected that in my career. But here we are, right? So this is all sorts of opportunities for everybody. So what we're doing is we're folding those into our existing program areas, and I think you will see, we did not include livestock yet because the USDA has taken the position, at least for now, and we're hoping to educate them so that this can be in the future. The department believes that hemp could be a great feed source for our livestock, especially our cattle here in Florida. And so but USDA has said if they find any CBD residue or hemp residue in meat, that meat will be rejected through their USDA inspections. So right now we're not allowing it to be included as a livestock feed, but we continue to work with USDA to hope they will see have a change of heart on that so we can have that as a resource as well. The rest of this otherwise is food, and I want to clear up some questions we get on this. So ideally what would happen is a producer would grow and then they would sell to a processor, or they would have a contract with a processor. What the statute says is that if the hemp is going to be hemp extract, so the CBDs or whatever else is going to be pulled out of the hemp and to be ingested, then those in being ingested, it becomes a food, which the department regulates food and manufacturing through our Division of Food Safety. So if you as a processor are going to extract hemp CBDs or whatever other properties out of hemp, or use that hemp in some sort of food, then you would have to get a food manufacturer's license from our Division of Food Safety. The good news is that is only a $650 license. The rest of that, though, is it has sanitation requirements. You have to do it in a clean, sanitary environment. The processing must take place in that area. And the whole idea of that is you need to, where you're manufacturing food, you have to make sure it's free of contaminants so that it doesn't get passed down the line. The rest of that is the statute says that the hemp extract must have certain labeling requirements. It must have a QR code. It must have a certificate of authenticity saying that it is that less than that legal limit, that hemp extract that is used in any food, and then that batch of CBD or whatever that's being used in the food has to be traceable all the way through to the retail packaging. So putting that into our rule, our process. Everything else is standard food manufacturing processes. There's nothing else new other than the statutory requirements. So with that, I think I've covered the big pieces of what our draft rule looks like and where we're going, and I look forward to your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And again, we'll have some time at the end to talk about. I know these rules are kind of getting it all at once. They are listed on their website. I think they've done a great job in trying to make this as open, as accessible, and transparent to everyone as possible. Next, we're going to have Dr. Rohrg, talk a little bit about the Industrial Hemp Research Program and the permits involved through his office. As Steve mentioned, the certified seed issue is important. As he pointed out, because of this boom in hemp, there's a huge shortage of feminized seeds around the country. One of the options for getting those seeds, certified seeds, are these industrial hemp research projects are authorized to make certified seeds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sharkey. My name is Eric Rohrg. I'm with Florida Department of Agriculture, Division of Plant Industry. So I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about cultivation of hemp and how it relates to our division. So I'll start at the beginning. Our division our mission is to protect Florida's agricultural, ornamental plants, industry, native plants from invasive plants, and invertebrates and pathogens, pests and pathogens. So that could be invertebrates, snails, slugs, insects. So that's primarily what I deal with on an everyday process. So right now, I'm involved in that I oversee the industrial hemp pilot project that we have here in Florida. So that came about through a 2014 Farm Bill and then was revised on the 2018 Farm Bill. And the way it stands right now is only land-grant universities, so we only have 2 in the state, that's University of Florida and FAMU, we're able to obtain permits to cultivate hemp. And that's going to change soon, sometime in the next couple months. That current industrial hemp planting, or actually it's called industrial hemp planting permits, that will be slightly revised, and that will allow other colleges and universities in the state to cultivate hemp. And so there's a lot of interest in that. We've already been talking to a lot of these universities. So I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit of background on these rules, because it's a part of it that we've gotten a lot of feedback from was the invasiveness of hemp and why in the rules it mentions that. So basically, it is considered an invasive plant. It is invasive in parts of the world, including parts of the United States and the Midwest. It is bad enough to where people do have to input into their, mechanical, chemical process to control it. And it's based on University of Florida Agronomy Department has a really excellent tool, a weed risk assessment. It's based on some work out of Australia. It's world renowned. It's a really good tool that looks at many aspects of any given plant species. And this one is, they ran it specifically and for industrial hemp, so not medical marijuana, just industrial hemp. It's based on scientific literature, feedback from industries. It looks at a lot of different aspects of the plant, such as if it produces a lot of seed, are the seeds edible, are they windborne, stuff like that. And that, you can actually go to UF invasive plant assessment webpage and find that information. And if you look at it, it has a score. Basically, that print gives you different information, a score, and then some verbiage on the plant's invasive potential. Doesn't mean that that is going to be what it is, but it's a potential, so it's to help guide us. So it does come back, I believe it's a 12 or 14 now. Anything with a number over 6 is considered invasive, so that this is considered an invasive plant. So that's where we're coming from on that. But as I mentioned, the pilot projects that UF and FAMU are working on, that is a component of their research. The idea behind the pilot projects was that they conduct research looking at different things like what varieties are going to grow in Florida, and which ones depending on what you want to do. Are you looking at seed? Are you looking at fiber? Are you looking at CBD? What's going to grow here? What are the best management practices? How invasive will it be? So I just wanted to give that as a background for the invasive part. And that comes into play where, as Stephen mentioned, in the rules, you'll have to provide a containment plan. There's been a lot of confusion with that. The containment plan is not how you're going to protect your crop from other plants coming in. It is how are you going to prevent the crop from spreading outside of your permitted area. And so basically that involves, it can be whatever you say it is specific to your situation, your land, but it basically would be bare earth buffers, mowed areas, like say a 10-foot, 20-foot buffer around the crop, and then just scouting, making sure if anything pops up in those areas, you eradicate it. So it actually is pretty simple. Hopefully, as we get information back from UF and FAMU, we'll know a lot more about the invasive potential and how much of a problem it is actually going to be. Another part of it is pests. So a lot of people, a lot of feedback we get is that you'll notice in the current state hemp plan, it allows for producers to import seed, which is certified seed that Stephen mentioned, and then also tissue cultured plants in a sterile media. And the reason behind that is there are a lot of, contrary to popular belief, there's a significant number of pests that attack cannabis. There's over 500 worldwide. We hear that every day. There's not any pests attacking cannabis. It's not true. So far, about half of under the pilot project, UF and FAMU have been able to bring in potted plants, tissue cultures, plant cuttings. And about half of what's come in so far has contained regulated pests. So that means it's pests that are not in Florida. And as I mentioned, our goal, Division of Plant Industry, is to protect our plant industries, native plants, agricultural, ornamental, from pests that are not established in the state that would cause harm. So because these pests are regulated, when those plants come in, if they contain them, which basically the plants have been coming in, it's run through us, they have to come through an interdiction station. The interdiction station is notified ahead of time. We have an inspector that inspects them either at the interdiction station or at the destination, which would be the field cultivation site. And so far we've seen hemp aphid and hemp russet mite. Neither of those are considered established in Florida. So when that happens, those plants either have to be treated or destroyed. The hemp mite is very difficult to get rid of. So in some cases, the plants have been destroyed. So that we foresee being a major issue. Somebody's spending $3, $4, $5 per seedling, and if you're trying to bring those in and they have the pest and you can't get rid of it, right, you're losing a large amount of money off the bat. So we want to avoid that. So that is why there's the language about the seed. That could change over time as we see what happens. We feel strongly that the nursery industry in Florida is going to work hard to propagate a lot of plants so that folks in Florida will actually be able to purchase seedlings from a nursery rather than wanting to go out of state to bring in a plant. And so I just talked about the insects, but there's also pathogens as well. So that's the reason behind that. The waste disposal plan, we get a lot of questions about that. That is what you make of it. It basically is how you're going to get rid of plants that you no longer need because they're too hot. The THC test is high or whatever reason. You just need to tell us what works for you. You could compost them on property. You could use chemicals. You could just do a mechanical, till them under. So it's what works, what's realistic for you, not so much a blanket on you need to do this. So that way it gives you the freedom. If you don't want to use chemicals, that's fine. You don't need to use chemicals. For the permitting, so as I mentioned, I'm doing the industrial hemp pilot projects, but once this moves to the full state hemp program, this will go to our permitting team. So we issue permits every day for many different reasons for the industry. So we already have a permitting team in place and a system to track it. So we realize we may have a lot of interest at the beginning, but we don't foresee that there's going to be much issue with being able to quickly turn these around and get them back to folks. We'll have a designated phone number and email for the hemp program so that folks can send us their documents or call us with questions so we can easily answer them. Planting, so this is going to be another topic that everyone's interested in, is the sampling and the testing of the THC. So on all of these, when we're working on these rules, it's not just in-house. We're working with other divisions. We talk to law enforcement. We talk to folks with University of Florida. We talk to a lot of people to get growers to get input on what they're doing and what's going to work, what's not going to work, and what other states are doing. So the sampling plan we came up with is based on what other states are doing and what we feel we could work with. And that would be within 30 days of you wanting to harvest a crop, you would need to notify us, and then the sampling would take place within that 30 days of harvest. And so we looked at what other states were doing, and they basically are cutting the top. It's a whole range from 2 centimeters to the top 20 centimeters, I think was the most we saw of the main growth stem on a select number of plants in your plot. So the way it stands now, and this could change, and as Stephen mentioned, we'll have a manual that puts out that has some images of what I'm talking about and lays out the numbers. But basically, the more acreage you have, the more plants you're gonna have to pull into that sample. And if you have, say, a couple acres, you would sample from 5 plants. So you would take one from the center of the plot, and then you kind of work in an S shape, so you hit each quadrant. So you take a plant sample, 8 to 10 centimeters off the top plant, the main growth stem, and combine those. So one for each of the quadrants of the plot and one in the center. But as the acreage goes up, that increases. And then that would be put in a box by the grower. The grower is doing the sampling. and sent to an ISO accredited lab. And then the lab results will be sent back to the grower, but then they're also sent to us. So if all goes well and you test under 0.3% THC, then you can move forward with whatever you already have planned to do with your plants. If it comes back hot from that lab, so it's over 0.3% THC, then we'd have a process where Florida Department of Agriculture employees come out, take a sample, and we run it in our labs. It'll probably be the AES division that does that. And that way, if it comes back hot again, then you'd have to move into, as Stephen mentioned, some type of remediation to be able to sell the crop. Or if we can't meet that, it would need to be destroyed. But as Stephen said, we're trying to work with everybody. We don't want people to fail. We really don't. So we're going to, try to work with people as much as possible within the constraints of the law. Also as Stephen mentioned, if for some reason that testing can't come back or something else comes up that you need to harvest sooner, within that 30 days you notify us, you could still harvest and store your harvest on your property until the test results come back, or if you do the follow-up, if there's the need to do the follow-up test by us, you could store it until that comes back and we figure out what's going on. There'll be probably once a year inspection where we come out to the plot or the cultivation site, and we would look at information that you have to retain, which is where did you buy your seeds, what varieties did you plant. You have to hold on to those for a couple years. We would look for pests and pathogens. So as I mentioned, if there's any regulated pests are found, then that you'd have to take actions on that to eradicate that, possibly. I mean, it depends on what it is. Interstate movement, Stephen pretty much talked about. As I had said, there's the concern of bringing pests in, so we have concern about other states wanting to bring in their biomass. So biomass would have to be rendered unviable before it comes in, meaning it could no longer contain live pests or pathogens. If you are moving plants within the state, you basically have to do it in a way that would prevent the inadvertent spread of the plant. So it would have to be in contained vehicles of whatever kind once you harvest and you're moving it to another location, such as a processor. And I think I kind of covered everything that relates to us. The seed stuff will be with another division, and we're still working on that. So I think that's all I have, actually. And then, as they mentioned, we'll have some questions at the end if anybody has any. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was a lot of detail, but I think if you're thinking about really getting into this business, their team will be the ones that really try to ensure that you're, how to apply, how to get a permit, and how to stay compliant. And again, they've been super helpful and very supportive, and I think that's been the attitude of the commissioner and the department. Next, we'll get into the legal issues here, and we've got two great lawyers here from Tallahassee who are in the cannabis space and the hemp space, so we look forward to working with them. Glenn, why don't you come on up here first with Stearns Weaver, one of our sponsors. Again, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Backstage, Commissioner Dozier made an apt comment, and it was, if we get this right, this is going to be an opportunity for not just big farmers and little farmers and big producers or manufacturers and processors and little ones. It's going to be an opportunity for everybody. And I think one of the distinguishing hallmarks of what we're seeing in the development of hemp as opposed to medical marijuana is that government is focused on doing that, having a level playing field and having officials who are helping shape the regulatory framework that are receptive to industry and are champions of the industry and want to see it grow broadly and deeply throughout the state. And I mention that because the department, as Stephen said, is in the rulemaking process right now. And so that's a really good glimpse into what the regulatory framework is going to look like as you folks are contemplating your business decisions to get into the space. So I urge you to do two things. Number one, pay close attention to that rulemaking. Number two, become involved in it, because these folks at the department, they're very smart, but they're also very receptive and willing to listen to the input of industry to make sure that the rules that are going to govern how you operate your business make sense and are feasible. So keep that in mind. Now that I'm done kissing up to government, let me get on to the topic of my discussion. And forgive me, because we've got a wide range of folks here. We've got growers, we've got folks interested in processing, manufacturing, maybe distributing and sales. So I'm going to step back a little bit and just start with some basic concepts just to frame some of the legal issues that we're going to confront today. So let's just start with basically, what is hemp as distinct from marijuana? Well, they're both plants that are part of the same genus or family. I'm not a science guy, I'm not an ag guy, so you're not going to get a technical discussion from me, but I can tell you generally as those terms are used, marijuana relates to the plant that is still illegal under federal law, and it's characterized not by how it looks, because marijuana and hemp are visually indistinguishable. So the only way you know whether you've got a legal product or an illegal one is if you've got a chemical analysis telling you that. So marijuana, which is illegal under federal law, is distinct from hemp because hemp, as Stephen said, is going to have 0.3% THC or less. Now, THC is the chemical compound. It's a cannabinoid. It's the thing that causes the high effect. So typically, marijuana will have high THC and low CBD. CBD is another compound that's you're hearing a lot of buzz about with hemp because it's supposed to have a lot of different properties, whether they're health related, whether they have industrial applications, and we'll get into that. Hemp is going to have low THC and high CBD, and hemp is often valued for its CBD content and its quality. So I want to distinguish that because we're here today because at the end of last year, the federal government, via the 2018 Farm Bill, legalized hemp. Prior to the bill passing, hemp was a controlled substance classified under Schedule I of the Controlled Substance Act, which means it was illegal. There were certain limited research programs where it could be grown, as we've discussed here in Eric's presentation with the land-grant university programs at FAMU and UF. But now that hemp is legal throughout the country, states are rushing to get through the regulatory process to set up state programs where it could be legally grown, processed, and sold. So what has Florida done since then? Well, we passed a statute that became effective in July that establishes the hemp program framework. And this industry has benefited from two things. Number one, the decriminalization of hemp, which makes the regulatory framework a lot less cumbersome than medical marijuana. But we've also learned a lot of painful lessons from the development of the medical marijuana industry in the state. So let's talk about some of those distinctions. Under the Florida statute, number one, I think one of the key things for people in this room is that it doesn't require vertical integration as you see in medical marijuana. So you don't have to be the same company that grows it, processes it, and sells it. You can have growers, you can have processors, you can have distributors and sellers of hemp. Well, that creates a much broader playing field. I think it lends itself to more rapid and broad economic development opportunities for folks in this room and around the state. The other key distinction is that under the Florida statute, there are no limits or caps on the number of licenses that can be awarded. Again, that's leveling the playing field for large and small players and players in different market segments. Now, to be clear, licensing is only required for cultivators. That's somebody that grows it, that cultivates it, that harvests it. Doesn't apply to processors, doesn't apply to sellers. Beyond that, the statute is pretty straightforward. It really focuses on making sure that we've got testing requirements to make sure, number one, that the THC content is under the legal limit. Number two, that compounds or contaminants that are harmful for humans are detected. And then it provides for some labeling requirements, such as a quick scan code or a barcode on a label that you can scan, and it'll take you to the lab, the independent testing lab analysis that will show you exactly what the THC content is, what the CBD content is, if there are any contaminants in there and things of that nature. So it's a necessary statutory framework, but it's also one that makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk a little bit about how this works in practical application. As Steve told you, the department is still in rulemaking process, so we don't have an application yet for somebody to get licensed. We understand that it's going to be a much less cumbersome and onerous type of application process that you see in medical marijuana, and in part that's because we're no longer dealing with a controlled substance. One question that I get a lot of times is, well, what if I want to, I don't want to grow, but I want to distribute a CBD product, or I want to sell CBD product? Here's the thing you have to be cognizant of. Federal law is still trying to work through some of these issues, and it's still a little bit of a Wild West territory. So while hemp cultivation is technically legal, right now, aside from the university programs, nobody is really growing hemp and processing it. So how are you going to get CBD product? Well, you're going to have to get it from out of state, most likely. Here's the rub. The FDA has taken the position that because CBD has been approved for limited purposes as a drug, it can't be sold in interstate commerce as a food additive or a dietary supplement. So they take the position that if you sell or transport CBD across state lines, that could be unlawful. And that's problematic for somebody looking to get into CBD business in Florida. Here's the rub on that, though. There are limited enforcement resources. So if you're getting into that business, there's a trade-off between, well, do I want to run the risk of FDA coming after me? And, or do I take the risk that they're not going to knock on my door because I'm a small guy or I'm not making health claims? So before you get into that space, I'll just say tread lightly and find yourself a good lawyer that can walk you through those processes, because we don't know what the feds are going to do. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but not long ago, the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Florida said that he was going to be prosecuting marijuana possession charges, whereas a number of state attorneys around the state decided to back off of that because of the issue I highlighted at the top of this conversation, which is marijuana and hemp are visually indistinguishable. So unless you've got some high-tech mobile testing lab that you can test product, it becomes a very dicey situation. So we haven't seen any major enforcement initiatives here in Florida, but if the U.S. attorney says he's going to pursue that stuff, I'd be a little bit concerned about it. So let me close on this quick point. The rules are evolving. The statutory framework is pretty clear. It's well identified. Pay attention to the rulemaking process. As you stand up your businesses, you're going to be able to have important insight and input to that process, and that's only going to inure to your benefit as you get into this state. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Glenn. I think it was very helpful, very interesting, important information for folks getting into this business, understanding kind of the legal issues and the distinction from marijuana. So again, another one of our famously helpful attorneys, Robert Williams with Lewis, Long & Walker, is going to add a little bit to that conversation.
And thank you very much. And so, you know, the good part about going at this point in time is that they pretty much covered most of this stuff. And so as I'm looking through my notes, I'm thinking, all right, Stephen got that, so that's not good. What am I going to talk about now? And then so, you know, the doctor got that part, and then Glenn got that next part. And so I'm looking at this stuff going, okay, so where are my notes going with this, and what are we really going to talk about? And so I won't take very much time, quite frankly. One of the things I did want to start with, though, is that the exceptional response that the Department of Agriculture took to this specific issue. So we're 9 months and a couple of weeks since the Farm Bill segregated marijuana from hemp, making hemp something that we could deal with legally on a national level. And I know a lot of other states have been doing some things, but it segregated that, so it took it off the controlled substance list. And a couple of months later in the legislative session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 1020, and then before the governor had the opportunity to approve it so it could become law, they went ahead and started, I'm pointing at Stephen specifically, they went ahead and started rulemaking. And so, quite frankly, in some circles in Tallahassee are like, can you start rulemaking before there's the law? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can, and they did. And so, if you're wondering whether or not whether the government and the Department of Agriculture is enthusiastic about this, I think that's your answer. The Commissioner Freed clearly campaigned on this issue, and they have been just breakneck speed the whole way through. But I would tell you also that, in my opinion, they've also done it correctly. To protect the process, to protect the growers. So there's a couple of things to highlight in some of the rules that hasn't been discussed that I'd like to at least highlight for you. So when you're looking at the next rule that comes out, the draft rules, all of these different minutia things in there, almost all of that is required by the federal law, by the 2018 Farm Bill. It's pretty much lockstep in there. And so that's why those things are in there. So there's a big segment of the rule that the Department of Agriculture will be coming out with that specifically mimics the federal law. And then the other portions of it that aren't mimicking the federal law are going to be dealing specifically with Florida issues. So Florida, and I think the good doctor would probably echo this as well, we get more pests than anybody else. We've got stuff coming in every port, every airport, all over the place. We've got giant African land snails. If you've never heard of those, that's actually a thing. We can talk later. It's a nightmare scenario. And all sorts of different pests. And so what you don't want to have happen is bringing in these plants or cultivars and introducing the new pest that's going to wipe out either half the crops that we already have or put us in a position where we've got a pest that we're going to have to deal with for this specific crop. And so these folks have been working in that arena, since the Department of Agriculture was formed. They actually do know what they're doing on that, and they're going to work hard to do that. The other segments where the Department of Agriculture is weighing in on this thing that's different from the federal law as well, is when you're dealing with animal feed and how they're going to deal with that, but also ingestion. And also the processing of CBD oil in the marketplace for consumption by humans. And so those, you can kind of think of it in those different areas of what they're going to deal with. So kind of backing up a little bit after that, after I've now patted the Department of Agriculture, I used to work for those guys, so I enjoyed working with them, patted them on the back quite enough. We'll move back into kind of echo some of what Glenn was saying as far as the FDA. The FDA has taken last spring, and then I can share with y'all some of these quotes that the FDA came out with. They are applying a rigorous science-based approach to the evaluation of products containing CBD. And what their main focus is, quite honestly, is that if there are medicinal or restorative portions of what your claims are that this will do, and that's why you're selling it, then they're going to treat it as a medicine. And there's a couple of, FDA has approved, in fact, Epidiolex, and I'm sure I'm saying that incorrectly, which actually contains CBD, and they've also approved Marinol and Syndrol, which are drugs that contain a synthetic form of THC. And so they're not going to, the FDA will not, it appears, be moving away from their stance that they're going to regulate those as drugs. And so I would agree with Glenn as well that if you're getting into that portion of the consumption of CBD, tread lightly and understand that it is the Wild West. And because, every time I talked to a couple of folks last night, I'm like, this is a problem. And they're like, well, wait a minute. I was just down at the Kangaroo Mart or the 7-Eleven or the CVS, and I see this CBD stuff all over all the shelves. I'm like, yeah, but the FDA is saying it's not legal. And I can't make it any more blunt than that. And so that's something to pay particular attention to. So the last wild card that I'll talk about, and then we'll be ready for our last speaker and then questions, really revolves around the USDA. And so the last wild card we have on this thing is when will the USDA come out with their rules and approve all of these things? Because as we've discussed, we're part of the way through of our writing. And I've dealt with, at past experience, dealt with rule challenges, and they can be ugly and mean and dirty and take a long time. And so we're hoping, for your sake, if you're looking to get into the hemp cultivation or processing business, that that it doesn't get challenged. Because if it does, it will in fact slow it down. That only matters if the USDA is in fact ready to approve that state hemp plan. And Stephen, this is an unfair question, but do you know of any other states that are further along than we are to get a state hemp plan approved?
No plans have been approved. Some have been submitted.
Okay, so there have been a few submitted. And also, so it's going to depend on what happens with the USDA on that and how quickly they can move forward with that and how much of a robust review they'll have. Quite frankly, I think that our discussions covered most of this stuff pretty well, but I am open for any questions, anything you guys want to talk about.
Thank you, Robert. That was very helpful. Our last panelist, and then we'll open up to questions, is Mike Akers, the CEO of Flag Credit Union. He'll explain what that is. He has been very energetic and supportive of this hemp industry, serves the agricultural employees, the Department of Agriculture. We've talked over the last couple of months, and I'm really impressed that the credit union is interested in getting into this space and serving potential businesses here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so FLAG is the non-for-profit financial cooperative that was established in 1960 initially to serve Department of Agriculture employees. And since then, we've branched out to local community, including now hemp products and services. So when we talk about financial services and how there's been kind of an apprehension for traditional FIs to kind of get into the space, I think it kind of stems from two places. The first being perception. And just lack of knowledge. When we hire a new teller, the first thing we teach them is you play a role in law enforcement, you play a role in anti-money laundering, and one of the first things that we smack them over the head with is drug and enforcement and kind of looking at some of those other things. Now all of a sudden we're shifting to, now it's this legal program that we want to make sure that we're embracing because it has been legitimized, and we're very excited to be part of that process. The second half is the legitimate legal and regulatory burden that we face as financial institutions in helping step forward in making sure that we have processes in place to not give this industry a black eye, make sure that we're helping to bring it into those traditional banking services, much like, if we would have turned our backs on mobile banking or online banking, this is just the next foray into financial services. So that being said, I think what you guys have probably already faced is some apprehension or additional questions if anyone's tried to get a checking account or a savings account for your new hemp business. That's the only thing I would advocate is that you kind of take three different things into mind. The first is really good record keeping. Some of the folks we've already started chatting with have gone through the regular process of registering with SunBiz and some other ways to make sure that they've got all their documentation in place. The second is really good record keeping, making sure that you've got all of your information readily accessible, and not being offended when we ask additional questions. So we want to make sure that we've got all of the processes in place to make sure that things don't happen that would impact your ability to access your money when you need it. So if there's shifts in your business, changes in how you do business and the way that you maybe shift from more cash or checks or whatever the way that you typically are transacting business, making sure that you're super transparent and working with your financial institution to make sure that you're communicating how you're doing. Because I think if we're working together, just like we've got multiple, diverse panel here, that we can make sure that we're providing the products and services that everyone needs to make this process legal and easy and convenient. And look forward to any questions that anyone may have. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to cut my shtick short. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good. Thanks, Michael. Well, thank you, everybody. We've got about 18 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up for questions. I have just two I'm going to ask real quickly for, I think that we're covered, but I want to make sure they're reinforced here, and perhaps for Stephen and Eric. This permit issue, I mean, I know the law and the rule and the federal law, who is required to get a permit? If they're going to cultivate, we talked a little bit about manufacturing, processing, selling, kind of just walk through that a little bit. And then And I've talked to your shop and others and the commissioner, this huge interest in applying for permits, potentially November, December. I mean, you may be swamped. Frankly, this is a huge influx of interest. Maybe Eric, you can talk about how, I know you're going to be ready for it, but what does that mean in terms of if I apply, how long do you think it'll take for me to get approved? So Stephen, maybe on the first one, and then we'll open it up to.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Really quickly, cultivation, you got to get a permit from our Division of Plant Industry. If you want to be a seed distributor, you have to get a permit from our Division of Agriculture and Environmental Services. If you want to process and then process hemp and/or manufacture hemp edibles for ingestion, you have to get a permit from our Division of Food Safety. If you want to sell at retail any products with hemp extract in it, you have to get a permit from our Division of Food Safety as a food establishment. So that's the retail sale. That is already that was already in law. And then you also, if you want to manufacture milk or sell milk or manufacture frozen desserts with or pet food, you have to go. Frozen desserts and manufacture frozen desserts or milk with CBD in it. You have to get a permit from our Division of Food Safety. So those are the highlights about things. And most people will take away. Don't get distracted. If you cultivate, you grow, you get one permit. If you're going to manufacture a hemp extract for ingestion, you're going to get a second permit. And if you're going to retail sale at a retail location, you've got to get that third food establishment permit. I will tell you, and I'll jump in, and Eric can talk to details. But by law, the department has 90 days to approve or deny any permit application. We fully intend to fall within that timeline and follow our statutory requirements. There is an out where if your application is incomplete, we have the opportunity to go back and ask you for more information. But you can expect that when we tell you that our rules are fully adopted and we're accepting applications, then we fully intend to do them within that 90-day requirement. So,
thank you.
Permitting wise, it's going to be very different for the folks that want to be in the industrial hemp pilot project, so the colleges and universities versus people who are the average person who's wanting to grow. So I won't even get into the industrial hemp pilot project. Best thing would be just to contact me directly, but there's actually 13. They have to submit an application that meets all the criteria of the rules. So there's actually 13 different areas they have to touch on, and it's a lot more lengthy and complicated than the open cultivation permit. So for those, you would have to provide, there's a fingerprint portion where you use live scan and somebody from the company or grower, and that's all defined in the rules that are posted now, would submit their fingerprints through the live scan. And then when they send their application to us, it's basically going to be able to go online and there'll be an application form that you fill out. It's going to be very short. Basically, who are you? What are you varieties you want to grow? Where? And then you'll tell us about the live scan. It has numbers attached to it for, to your actual scan, and then we will get that information from Ag Law. So in the rule, I forget what it is exactly, but you can't have certain drug convictions. So as soon as we get that back from Ag Law, then we'd finish processing. And the only other information you have to give us besides that short application you fill out would be, and then there's the fingerprint part, and then the environmental containment plan I touched on, and the waste disposal plan. So you would need to tell us up front, what are you going to do with plants that you're disposing of, and how are you going to keep your plants from spreading? And that could be as simple as a couple sentences each. Just what are you going to do that works for your situation? The application is going to be pretty painless. There's no fees at this time. So you would then submit that to us, and the turnaround time is hard to say right now. I can't imagine it'd be more than, I don't even want to say how long, but it's going to be pretty.
I don't want you to say either. So
I'm not. It won't be. It won't be. Very
I thought
long.
he said, yeah.
Yeah, we have a permitting team in place. We kind of did a dry run of a program like this where all of a sudden you may have thousands of people that are interested in it. Last year with saw palmetto berries, you're not aware, there's thousands of people that go out every year and collect palmetto berries. It's a big industry. And all of a sudden now we needed to start issuing permits for that. Well, that was thousands of people contacting us within weeks before the season started, all wanting to get their permits now, otherwise they can't harvest. So, and we got everybody their permits on time. So all I can say is we're going to do the same with this.
Jeff, I just want to we'll say one more thing. On the environmental containment plan and the waste disposal plan, I keep pushing you back to our website, but we're going to be putting examples out there that we hope that producers will look at and follow and take as a template, or just what should this something look like, and then go back and make sure that each one of those looks, when you submit it with your application, has the main elements of it. So keep going to our website. We're going to be pushing more and more information out there. It'll all be in place for that.
Great, thank you, thank you. Questions, sir?
My name is Randy Avon. First of all, I want to compliment you, sir, on this great event. It's really tremendous. It's been very helpful. Steve, I applaud you for the proactive activity you're taking with the FDA. That's critical. I'm a CEO of an international hemp company that we're in the processing. We're also seeking farmers in Florida that need funding and assistance to work together with them. Mike, I'll throw my question out to you, sir. Some of the farmers that we've got structured relationships with in Florida have had problems opening bank accounts. Is there better access to the credit unions, or is it still working motion all the way around? Because you mentioned hemp, everybody gets nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely been progress, and I think events like this, as well as recently enacted legislation, including the Safe Making Act that was I think last week at Congress, and then also just all the work that the state's been doing. Guidance from NCUA, which is our FDIC on the credit union side, also released guidance that said as long as you're complying with the following bullets, then it should open up doors for folks. Part of the speed bump that is currently in place is finalizing the ruling around how folks are going to get their certifications and the signage and all the other things that some of the other folks have spoke about this morning. But with the proposed guidance, we can follow that to start to open accounts. So you should see more and more folks get into it, especially as it's becoming just demystified and people are starting to understand the differences between the two. There is still quite a bit of regulatory burden on the part of the financial institution in terms of some of the tracking and oversight that we have to have for the program. So one of the things I did want to point out too is when you see things like typically free accounts and things like that, you may see increased fees associated with programs that are servicing hemp and marijuana businesses, just because there is an additional burden on the part of the financial institution to service those folks. But you should see more and more people getting into the space over the next couple of weeks, especially through the end of the year as things become more finalized.
Great question.
Steve, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question for you. I'm the county commissioner for Malone, and I'll be dealing with your relatives.
I'm related to everybody in Malone, so yes, you will.
Are you sure you're not a state attorney?
We have a farmer that the product test over the limit. Have you guys looked at the possibility of designating this crop to be used for non-pet and non-human consumption some way so they don't have to destroy the crop?
We're looking at all the options right now. The problem is the Farm Bill kind of says we can't be harvested if it's over that legal limit. So we're looking, hopefully there'll be some research. There's some ideas from other states that if it is over legal limit, you can water it to bring it down. Some of our scientists are kind of skeptical about that. But we're going to do whatever we can to work with, and we have some ideas. We're still fleshing out. They're not ready for public display, but my pledge is that, and the commissioner's pledge is that we will work with our producers as much as possible to help them, because the last thing we want to do is have any producer have to destroy their crop.
Great, thank you. Miss?
Yes, hi. I was wondering about the waste disposal and the containment issues. Would they not be the same as they are on the medicinal side? That's one question. And the other, is there a minimum acreage requirement to get a permit?
There's no minimal or maximum acreage. I don't know exactly how the medical marijuana are destroying their crops, to be honest. Stephen may know, so I don't know that it'd be the same. But examples for hemp would be you could do a chemical control like spraying Roundup or some other herbicide on it. You could still cut it all and compost it or till it under. But medical marijuana, I'm sure, is not doing any of those. So probably would be different.
Yeah, medical marijuana is almost exclusively grown indoors in Florida right now. There are a couple MMTCs that we know about that are doing outdoor trials to see how that works. However, we expect a lot of this to be grown outdoors, especially if you're doing growing for fiber. That seems to be the best method for that. And we do, and maybe some of those older industrial spaces indoors if you're growing for CBDs. But we'll work with you, and I think it will be a process that will be painless, and we're going to have some of those examples on the website, so that to hopefully be helpful to everybody.
We're going to do here. What we got? Oh, sir, and then here, and then there. Then we'll keep going. John, go ahead. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
John Rivera, Record Buck Farms, on behalf of the farmers. First of all, thank you all. We really appreciate you being here. Eric, you talked about remediation when we were talking about testing of the plant. When I talked to my fellow farmers in the area, we're all concerned. My partners have decided if anything goes wrong, I go to jail. So I just want to get some clarification on that. There are a lot of things that can happen in Florida that put stress on these plants that can bring them to the next level. And so we're concerned about that. Could you talk a little bit about this remediation? Is it an administrative thing? And I don't want to get ugly, but at some point, if something goes wrong, law enforcement does get involved. So we're concerned about what that cutoff point is or what that may look like in terms of us as farmers.
Did you kind of just
Yeah, so on the last on the piece again, the remediation is an evolving thing. We are learning on that. I will tell you the department has taken a policy position that any plants grown will be dealt with administratively instead of through law enforcement at this time. Law enforcement was happy with that decision of ours. They didn't want to have to get out and get involved in that. But the department, per the Farm Bill, cannot allow any hemp over the legal threshold to be harvested. So we'll be working with the industry to try to find any way possible to remediate. We have some ideas, like I said a minute ago, but we're still working on that piece of it.
Great.
And I've got a follow-up to that. Jeff, I got a follow-up to that because the question you have is you're worried about going to jail. Well, so it's good, that's a good concern. I've got, so it's understandable. I actually started my career as an assistant state attorney. And so when you legalize this sativa cannabis plant, but there's two different versions of it, it's hard to prosecute, which, the state attorneys across the state are finding that now. The good news for you, and I would suggest that you look at both the state and federal law on this, or get someone to kind of really walk you through it, is that negligent possession of, if you're growing hemp, and you believe you're growing hemp and not marijuana, and if you negligently wind up with a hot plant, there's no criminal prosecution going to attach to that. Now, if you voluntarily grow hot, you got this big field and you got some really hot plants in the middle you're going to sell to the other guy, that's a problem. Don't do that. Okay. So the little free legal advice there. And so, but in any event, so in the state and federal law, there's a very interesting carve out for that should assuage some of those fears for you.
If I could just layer on that real quick, and the way to help you out in that regard is by paying attention to and following the rules that the department comes out with. So if you've got your GPS coordinates entered in there, if you got your fencing, you got your signage, your testing and all that stuff, that's the type of factual background that's going to lend itself to the negligent issue that Robert highlighted.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Here, and then we'll go there, and we've got a couple minutes left. We'll go back to the blue.
I think, Eric, I think this question would be best answered by you. How many ISO-accredited labs are doing testing right now in the state of Florida? Do we have a number on those?
I don't. That's AES kind of handles that, our AES division, but
we know we believe there's at least 3 to 5 online now that can do it today in the state, and we know there are more that are working to get their licenses to be able to do it.
One of them is here.
And on the cost for this, right, for a small farmer, say I want to start out with an acre, I want to grow maybe 10 plots on that acre, versus a large farmer, 100 acres, still 10 plots, right? So they're going to do 10 tests. but larger acres, like you were talking about, different sectors in that plot. Just wondering about, have any discussions revolved around the cost of the testing to the farmers?
We've been working with the labs to find out what the testing is and to be able to provide that information. We have to build that into our rulemaking to understand what the cost will be. So that's something that we'll be putting out with our next draft of the rules.
Thank you. This young lady over here, quick, can you give her the microphone? Yeah, she's been patiently waiting. Thank you. We've got room for a couple more, so we're.
Hello, sir. My name is Bridget Forsyth of T&B Forsyth General Contracting out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm born and raised in Panama City, Florida.
Okay.
But we have land that we would like to utilize for cultivating. Now, with our general contracting company in Georgia, we have our service disabled veteran certifications, our minority women certifications, our disadvantaged business certifications. So as we form our business here in Florida, are those certifications that will be useful for us in order to get into this industry?
Did you follow that, Stephen?
I did. I will also pass it down to the private counsel. I can't give legal advice to you, but I will say we are not going to have any minimum requirements or any certifications to do cultivation in the state are not required by our rules.
I get this gentleman in the blue shirt back here, and then we'll come back over this way. So could you grab the microphone for him quick?
Probably loud enough.
I'm sorry.
I'm just interested in knowing about regulatory issues towards the location of your plot versus your neighbor growing seed. We're growing oil. How far apart we're going to need to be, and who gets first priority, the larger or the first to the pump?
Two neighbors. One's growing hemp, and one's growing.
Now, one growing hemp for oil.
Yeah.
One's growing hemp for seeds. They're going to pollinate my oil plant patch, which I do not need, of course.
Yeah, so we thought a lot about that. We, believe it or not, that was one of the very first questions I asked. We also have concerns about, I mentioned earlier, some of the MMTCs are starting to grow outdoors. So we have concerns about that. We don't regulate the medical marijuana grows, the Department of Health does. But we have had conversations about that. I will tell you, the only thing we can find is that one university, Cornell, I believe, or has been doing some trial research on it, and they have not released their results as far as cross-pollination and its separations. So since we are a science-based agency, and we have to base all of our decisions in science as far as our regulatory programs, and since we have no good science on that issue, we have not included that in our regulations. So there is no first come, first serve. But what I tell farmers when they call about issues with their neighbors, I said, farmers, it is something good to talk to your neighbors. Know what you're, just like it is with any other crop. Know what it is, know what they're growing, know what you intend to grow, have those conversations. There are things you can do to protect yourself somewhat with some fencing and separations, but the science is all over the place, and there are a lot of guesstimates out there about how far the pollen will grow, how far it won't grow. Nothing that our scientists have seen that is, we felt is trustworthy to be based on any regulatory decisions on at this time.
Thank you, Steve.
There is no regulation. My neighbor, if I'm already going for oil.
No, I'll answer. Yeah, I'll interrupt you. No, there is no. I can't stop your neighbor from growing. I'm not going to stop you from growing either. So,
okay, we're going to take two more questions. The gentleman here, and then the gentleman there, right here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark Ito from the law firm Parker & Hudson here in Tallahassee. You mentioned, this is for Mr. Hall, you mentioned that you're under a 90-day deadline to approve permits once the applications come in. And my question is, are you referring to the Administrative Procedures Act provision in 120.60 for that deadline? And I have a more general question too. We learned this is an important question to ask in the medical marijuana world. Is the department working on their general assumption that the Administrative Procedures Act's licensure provisions apply to the permitting process?
Yes and yes. So for the lawyers in the room, that yes and yes is good enough, but the rest, the 90-day I mentioned, applies to all agencies, in my opinion, unless exempted, all agencies' applications for approving and denying applications. And so that's what the assumption we're working under.
Good. Last question.
My name is Bill Schatzman with Atlas Laboratories. We're the third-party laboratory provider. My first question is to the banker.
Credit union.
If we're doing, credit union, pardon me, if we're doing business with you and our client wants to transfer the money to us and we're in the same bank, are there going to be additional fee, or the same credit union, are there going to be additional fees for the transfer since you're able to know where the money came from and where it went?
I just do not. I mean, every institution is going to have their own fee structure. I just anticipate that, in a world where we've seen a lot of free business accounts, that you may see additional fees associated. It could be transactional based, it could be balance based. It's going to be up to the institution. I would assume within the institution there would probably not fees associated with that, but it would be depend on who you bank with.
Okay. And the second one is to the regulatory gentleman. With the 17025 requirement, is there going to be a provisional licensing where we can begin testing, showing our ability from another laboratory that's out of state, so that we have time to get our ISO 17025, but at the same time we're able to provide our services to the customers?
So as far as getting your ISO accreditation, if you're working on that now, that's great. You don't have to go through us to do that. I will tell you what we are planning to do for our laboratories and so for producers to understand, and when you're having discussions with laboratories, our laboratories are developing methods now that we're going to use for in-house for that secondary, the confirmatory screening test if the first test shows that plants are hot. And we're going to be, actually for the labs, we're going to be putting that and making that available through our website so that the labs will know what exactly the tests and methods we're using.
Good.
And so that labs can be able to assure the producers that they're running the same processes.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to take a break. 15 minutes. We're going to start back at 10:30. That's a big hand for the panel. I think that was very informative. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. And 15 minutes. We'll be back.